I'm back. I took a couple months away from YouTube, but I decided to return because the MLB trade deadline is next week, specifically Tuesday, July 30th, some point in the evening, I don't remember the exact time. But with that approaching, I wanted to break down a bunch of the players who could get moved at that deadline. Now, I've chosen 9 teams that are going to be sellers. There almost certainly will be a couple more that I left out. I didn't talk about the Reds or the Cubs, who appear to be selling right now. But for these 9 teams, I've got 2 or 3 players per team, 24 total players, and we're going to talk about kind of who they are, what they could bring to another team, and then some of the teams that might be interested. Now, I'm not a huge prospect guy, so I'm not really going to get into returns. I don't know every team's prospect pool well enough to really predict what teams are willing to part with or how certain players are valued, so we're skipping that entirely. Now, I am re-recording this intro. This is Saturday morning, July 27th, because I put this whole video together yesterday on the 26th, and Zach Eflin has already been traded. He got traded to the Orioles. That's not where I predicted him to go. I had him going to the Cardinals. But that doesn't change any of the other predictions I make in this video. It just, I've already got him wrong, and by the time this video gets out, either late Saturday or early Sunday, some of these other players may move already. And so these predictions are as of Friday morning, July 26th.
Kicking things off with the Rays, they're clearly in seller's mode, not just moving guys like Phil Maton and Aaron Savale, but now selling Randy Arozarena to the Mariners Thursday night. So there's no guarantee they're going to continue to sell. They are right around 500. They're not too far out of the playoff picture. But if they do, a few more guys that could be on the move. Number 1, Zach Eflin. He's probably the most predictable player on the market as far as what an acquiring team should expect of him. Since he became a full-time major leaguer back in 2018, he's had an ERA between 3.5 and 4.5 every year. Last year was remarkable for him, while this year's a bit of a return to his career numbers. And most importantly, Eflin's under contract for next year, 2025, and his salary jumps from $11 million to $18 million. The Rays tend not to like to pay players all that much, especially for a guy who's already 30. So I think at the end of the day, he's going to get moved. There's a ton of starting pitching out there, but there's also a ton of teams that need starting pitching. The Red Sox, Astros, Cardinals, Guardians, they're all probably going to be in on him. The Twins probably not, because it seems like they really want a pure rental. With his extra year, they probably are out on him. And then the richer teams in terms of prospects, the Dodgers and Orioles, are probably going to swing higher than him. But if they can't land one of the bigger names, maybe they look at Eflin. Another guy on the Rays who they may move is Isaac Paredes. Now, let's get this straight. I don't know if they're going to move him. In fact, I would lean towards that they don't move him. But he's extremely valuable. He plays multiple positions, he's under team control through 2027, and he's only 25 years old. But they did just trade Randy Arozarena. Randy was under team control through 2026, and Paredes is probably their most valuable trade chip. I think the Yankees are going to be on him. They do need a third baseman bad, and they might even try to pair him with a reliever like a Pete Fairbanks or somebody else in the Rays bullpen. I could also see the Astros having interest, but more for first base, as the Jose Abreu experiment really failed for them, and Alex Bregman is a free agent after this year, and so Paredes could move to first there, and then slide over to third if Bregman leaves as a free agent. But again, I lean towards the Rays keeping him. He's just so valuable. He hasn't been quite as good as last year, but he's been pretty close, pretty damn close. And so he's going to be expensive. He's going to cost any team acquiring a lot, and I'm not sure if a team is willing to do that right now, if there's enough teams that need corner infielders. Now, in a very similar boat to Paredes, we've got Yandy Diaz. The big difference between Diaz and Paredes is Diaz is already 32. He's under team control through 2026. He plays the same positions, the corners of the infield, but unlike Paredes, he's having quite a down year. After career bests in 2023, he won the batting title. And like Paredes, I don't think Diaz is going to move at the deadline. Now, there have been teams linked to him, the Astros, the Mariners, so there is a chance he gets moved, but I feel like the Rays would be selling low, and they'd really, really like to build up his value a little bit more before they move him. Now, like the Rays, the Marlins have already begun to sell. They moved Luis Arraez months ago, and on Thursday night they also moved AJ Puck. They do still have a couple big pieces that they could move in the next few days. Now, the biggest of those is going to be Tanner Scott. He's maybe the best reliever on the market this year, if not the best, then one of the best. He's a pending free agent, and he's had a solid few years as the Marlins' primary closer. I think the Yankees are going to be in the mix, the Mets, the Phillies, the Diamondbacks. There's a lot of teams that do need bullpen help, and he's a guy who's proven he can close. He's a guy with a track record of a few years, not just a one-year thing. We'll see, but I think it's a near guarantee that he's going to end up getting moved somewhere. Now, the only other pending free agent on the Marlins is Josh Bell. He's having a down year, so I don't think he's going to really cost another team that much. But Miami's so far out that they have no reason to keep him. I keep an eye on the Astros. I think they make sense as a spot for him. They do need help at first base between the disaster that was Jose Abreu and John Singleton holding the spot right now. They've had the least productive first base group in all of baseball, so even though Bell hasn't been great, they may want to just get another fresh face in the mix. The Pirates could also be interested, but I don't really think Josh Bell's that big of an upgrade over Rowdy Tellez, and so I think they're going to look to improve elsewhere. Now, another piece on the Marlins who's been getting a lot of buzz is Jazz Chisholm. Now, he doesn't have to be traded right now at this deadline. He's got 2 more years of control, but rumors have been swirling that he's going to get moved. He plays both second and center field, which opens up some extra potential destinations. The Dodgers could look at him for center field, but he had that issue earlier in the year with his former teammate Miguel Rojas. I'm not sure the Dodgers really want to bring that into the clubhouse. Now, some teams that could be interested, I think the Yankees are probably the one with the strongest interest. Jazz would be a clear upgrade over Gleyber Torres. He's having a terrible year. Or you could play Jazz in center field. You could let Judge move to a corner, take a little bit of the load off of him. Now, there have been reports that the Yankees have concerns on how he fits into their clubhouse. I'm not sure if that's really a they don't want him, or if it's a more they're trying to drive the price down. A couple other teams with some potential interest. The Royals and Pirates are both teams that Jazz would fit a hole for, more center field than second base. And so I could see them having some interest. But again, I think the Yankees have a clearer need and are more pressed to compete right now. And so I think they would be the favorites to bring in Jazz Chisholm. Up next, we've got another team that should be selling, by all accounts, the Rockies. But their front office is so hard to predict. So I'm not sure that they're going to move any of these guys or really make any selling trades at all. But the guy who's getting the biggest rumors for them is their third baseman, Ryan McMahon. He's having the best year of his career. He made the All-Star game this year for the first time. The Yankees are almost definitely interested. They need help at third. They could even play him at second if they really wanted to. But according to McMahon himself, he spoke to the Rockies general manager, and he knows he's not getting traded at this deadline. Now, it would make sense for them to sell high, but he's been there a long time. It seems like they want to do right by him. And so because he's on a long-term contract, they don't need to trade him right now. In theory, next year could be just as good, and they could trade him at the deadline or in the offseason and probably get a similar return. Now, on the flip side, you've got Elias Diaz, who probably should have been traded at the deadline last year after he won the All-Star Game MVP, because I don't really see a market for him this year. Most of the playoff teams have had good production from their catchers, and the couple who haven't, the Twins and the Guardians, they're not really likely to cut their veteran backups or their young starters, and so I don't think they're going to add a third catcher. If Diaz is moved, they're probably the two I would look at as destinations, and he'd probably be pretty cheap because he is a pending free agent, but I just don't see him moving. As far as pitching on the Rockies, Cal Quantrill's probably the guy who's going to draw some interest. He's had a really solid rebound season after his disaster, whatever that was, with the Guardians last year. He is under contract 1 more year, and he's not, a top of the market guy by any means, but he is a depth guy. We've seen a couple depth guys get moved already, your Aaron Savales. And so smaller market teams like the Brewers, who did add Savale but need some more help, I could see them looking to add him. Reunions with the Guardians is also something I could see happening as well. Moving on to the Nationals, they were close to a playoff spot at one point, but they've slid recently, and so they're nearly 10 games below 500, and they're out of the playoff picture. They've already sold off a reliever, and so they've got a couple pieces left that they can use to rebuild their depth, with their top guys beginning to debut, and maybe they can even compete next year. The first of those guys is Jesse Winker. He's having a career resurgence with the Nationals after an awful year last year in Milwaukee. And the Braves could use a corner outfielder. They've been really struggling in left and right with Acuna out. The Royals, Cardinals, Dodgers, there's a handful of teams looking for outfield help, and he could really help any of them. He's having a really solid year. And all of that also applies to another Nationals outfielder, Lane Thomas. Now, the difference is he's under control for next season as well. He's a little bit younger, too. He's only 28. So he might be the type of guy that Washington chooses to sign long-term and keep as part of their new core. Now, the same teams are probably going to be in on him. Anybody who really needs an outfielder is probably calling the Nationals about Lane Thomas. Now, the Blue Jays are not a team that I think is going to send out their big pieces. I don't think Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Bo Bichette are getting traded at this year's deadline. I don't think they need to do it right now. I think they can wait to the offseason. But they do have a couple smaller pieces that I think are going to draw some interest. So first up, Yusei Kikuchi. He's had a solid last couple years with the Jays. He's about to hit free agency, and he's probably going to be on the cheaper side for a trade. So I'd keep an eye on teams like the Guardians and the Brewers, your smaller market teams. The Twins are also probably going to be in on him because he is a true rental. And the Red Sox, the Cardinals, the Dodgers, anybody who needs starting pitching is probably looking at Yusei Kikuchi. Justin Turner is also a pending free agent, and I think the Red Sox are a good fit for him. He could play some first base. I mean, Tristan Casas is hopefully going to be back soon, but he's been out most of the season, and they could use him at first. They can use him at DH. He was really well liked in Boston last season. He had a solid year with them, and so I don't think it would cost them all that much to bring him back. And another guy on the team who I think is going to draw maybe not too much interest, but from one particular team, I think Chad Green is going to get moved, and I think he's going to go to the Yankees. He's been really good for the Blue Jays this year. He's been closing a little bit recently. He set his career high in saves. He's not really been a closer before. And I mentioned the Yankees for Tanner Scott, but I think they're going to be in on a lot of the major relievers. I think they're going to add 2, maybe even 3 relievers at this deadline. It's really a need for the team. And so I would not be shocked at all if they go out and get Chad Green. He's a guy they really liked having him, and I think a reunion makes a lot of sense. Now, the Angels are out, and unlike last year where they bought and traded basically their whole farm and tried to get back in with Ohtani, they're not going to do that. With no Ohtani, they're not going to push for the playoffs, and they're going to sell. And so the big guy for them is Tyler Anderson. He's having a really solid year for the Angels, made the All-Star game, he's top 10 in the AL in WAR, and he's got 1 more year on his contract. And so there's a decent number of pitchers on the market, as I've mentioned before. So I think the same set of names, your Cleveland, Boston, Milwaukee, Minnesota, St. Louis, the Dodgers, I think they're all going to have some interest in him, especially that next year's only $13 million. So even the small market teams can afford him. He's been very solid this year. Now, out of their bullpen, there's a few guys who are going to get some attention. The main one is going to be Carlos Estevez. He's a pending free agent. He's been absolutely filthy this year. He was really good last year, too. And the same deal as other relievers. The Yankees are going to be in on him, the Mets, the Phillies, and the Diamondbacks, and a couple other teams. A lot of teams like to add relievers at the deadline, so, something off the board wouldn't surprise me too much either. He plays all over the infield, and the team like the Yankees, who needs help both at second and third, should be in on him. I think he makes a lot of sense for them. I think he'd also make sense for the Mariners. The Jorge Polanco experiment hasn't worked. They really need another bat. He's been league average, if not a little bit better, in his career, and so I think the Mariners could look to add him even after adding Randy, and I think Pittsburgh and Kansas City could also be in on him. They both, need just that extra boost. Alongside the Angels in the AL West, we've got the Oakland A's in their last year in Oakland, and they are very far out of it as well. And if not for the White Sox, they'd be the worst team in the AL. They've already moved out a lot of talent over the last 2, 3, 4 years, but they still got a couple big names who could be on the move this week as well. Now, at the plate, we've got Brent Rooker, and his last year and a half since he joined the A's, he's been astounding. He's been phenomenal. He was an all-star last year. This year, he's 3rd in the AL in OPS+. He's top 5 in homers, and the A's don't even need to move him right now. He's got a few more years of control, but every sign points towards a trade either right now or after the season. Now, the only knock against Rooker is his defense. He's been almost exclusively a designated hitter, but teams could use him in the corner outfields if they feel that his defense isn't going to be too much of a liability. Now, a team I think is going to be really, really in on him is the Pittsburgh Pirates. Their pitching has just been phenomenal this year, and they need help at the plate. They've been pretty terrible overall at the plate. They can't win every game with Brian Reynolds as their only great hitter. And so I think Rooker is a very interesting piece to add to that team. Again, you put him in one of the corners, you bat him cleanup, and I think it just really makes a lot of sense, especially with the extra years of control. This is a young team. They want to compete beyond this year, and having him around for 3 more years is something I think they're going to consider valuable. Now, out of the bullpen, we've got Mason Miller. He's been one of the most electric players in baseball this year. His fastball's well into the triple digits. He's striking out 15 batters per 9, and he's under team control until 2030. Now, given that crazy amount of control, I don't think he's getting traded right now because I don't think the A's have to. I think they can wait until after the season. But also with his injury concerns, his injury history, I think the teams are going to balk a little bit at what the A's are asking for. Again, it's a lot of control. It's going to be a very huge package, and stuff like that just tends to be more common in the offseason. So for now, I don't think he's getting moved. Now, there's 2 more teams I'm going to look at. They're both in the American League. They're both different shades of bad, We're going to start with the worst one. The Chicago White Sox are the worst team in baseball. They're the worst team in baseball in years. They're like historically bad. They're not going to win 50 games. Now, most of their pending free agents are more fringe guys, your Paul DeYoungs, and they're going to get moved, but they're not going to be that valuable. They're not going to be that interesting of moves. But they've got three players with a little bit of term that are getting a lot of attention from other teams, and I think we're going to see some huge blockbuster trades. Now, let's start with Eric Fetty. He returned from the KBO this year on a 2-year, $15 million contract. He's been one of the few bright spots for the Sox this season. He's second in the AL in pitching WAR and seventh among all AL players. Now, because the White Sox are so bad, they're so far out of it, they're expected to move Fetty right now. And the Astros reportedly have some interest in Fetty, and I could see that. They do need another starter, and as recently as last year, they did make a deadline deal with those White Sox. They acquired Kendall Graveman. And I think other teams like the Brewers, the Cardinals, other kind of smaller market AL, NL Central teams that are competing, I think they could all be in on it. Up next, we've got maybe the best hitter on the market this year, Luis Robert. Now, he hasn't been fully healthy this season, but he's got a career 124 OPS plus. He plays solid defense in center field, and he's got control through 2027. And so I think many teams are going to be interested. Now, the two who should be favorites to land Lou Bob are the Orioles and the Dodgers, who both have great competitive teams, but have a hole in the outfield and in recent years have been willing to make big swings like this. And I think both teams would be willing to part with valuable young players to compete right now. And a package of Lou Bob and his teammate Garrett Crochet, who we're about to get to, makes a lot of sense for both of those teams. Now, Crochet has been arguably the best starter in the AL this year after a few years as a reliever for the White Sox. He made the All-Star game. He could be a finalist for Cy Young. He's controlled for this year and two more. And so for the Dodgers and the Orioles, the extra years of control is very attractive, especially the Orioles, who have a number of top prospects, but for a guy who's going to leave them in 3 months, they may not be willing to give them up. Now, our last team is the Detroit Tigers, and they hope to compete for a weak AL Central this year, but with Cleveland, Minnesota, and Kansas City all outperforming expectations, they're on the outside looking in. And so they've got two very interesting pitchers who are drawing a lot of buzz on the market. So first up, we've got Jack Flaherty. He's probably the best rental pitcher on the market right now. He's rebounded really nicely on his 1-year prove-it deal. He's already got more WAR this year than his last 4 combined. So he's in line for a decent payday this winter, and he's almost certainly going to get traded at the deadline. Now, any team that needs a starter is going to be in on Flaherty at the deadline, but not all of them have the farm system to make that move. So certain teams that would be in on rental starters are probably out on him, but I'd still look at the Dodgers, I'd still look at Baltimore, Minnesota, Cleveland, Houston, Boston even. Like, there's a whole bunch of teams that need starting pitching, and so the Tigers are going to get calls, they're going to get a great package, and Flaherty's going to get traded for the second year in a row on the deadline. Now, their other pitcher is a guy who I don't think is going to get moved, but it's Tarek Skubal. He's generating a lot of buzz. He's one of the very few pitchers in baseball who's having a better year than Crochet and Flaherty. He's the odds-on favorite for the AL Cy Young right now. He's under team control for 2 more years. And so overall, he's probably the most valuable chip at the deadline. Again, I don't think the Tigers are going to trade him just because I don't think anybody's really going to meet their asking price. Now, for these 24 players, I'm going to make a wild guess prediction on where they're going to end up, whether they're going to be traded or not. I'm doing this morning of July 26th. So by the time this video comes out, a couple of these guys are probably going to get moved anyways, but hopefully I've called them right. So Zach Eflin, I've got him going to the Cardinals. Isaac Paredes, I have not moving. And same with Yandy Diaz. I don't think either one's getting traded. Tanner Scott, I'm sending him to the Mets. Josh Bell to the Houston Astros. Jazz Chisholm, I think the Yankees are going to get him. Ryan McMahon, I think the Rockies keep him. Elias Diaz, I think the Rockies also keep him, but this case more because nobody really wants him. Cal Quantrill, I think the Brewers are going to bring in Cal Quantrill. Jesse Winker, I think makes a lot of sense to the Braves. And his teammate Lane Thomas, I have the Nationals keeping. Yusei Kikuchi, I have going to the Twins. Justin Turner, I have going back to his Red Sox. Chad Green, I have going back to the Yankees. Tyler Anderson, I have going back to the Dodgers. A lot of guys going back to teams they've been to. This is kind of how my brain works. And I've got Estevez and Rengifo packaged together going to the Yankees. Got Brent Rooker going to the Pirates. Mason Miller I have staying in Oakland. Eric Fetty I have going to the Astros. I have Lou Bob going to the Orioles, and I have Crochet going with him to the Baltimore Orioles. I have Jack Flaherty going to the Cleveland Guardians, and I have Tarek Skubal staying in Detroit.
Anyway, let me know down in the comments who you think is going to get these players. If there's some who you think aren't going to move, are going to move, kind of your predictions for the MLB trade deadline. I'm going to do a recap on the deadline a week or two after, just to kind of go over the biggest trades, dive into the prospects a little bit, and see who did well, who didn't do well, and who's kind of set themselves up in a good spot for the playoffs. I'll see y'all next time.